In the valley of Oakhaven, there is a workshop that has no sign and no name. Inside, the air smells of cedar wood and old oil. Against the walls, 1,000 clocks hang in total silence. They do not tick, they do not chime. They simply wait. The only sound is the soft falling of snow against the window pane and the rhythmic, metallic scratch of a needle against brass. Everything here moves at the speed of a heartbeat, or not at all. Elias sat at the workbench, his shoulders hunched like a mountain under a heavy mist. He was only 24, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who had lived twice that. He was an apprentice to the master clockmaker. Yet in 3 long years, Elias had never successfully made a single clock run. His hands were steady, his eyes were sharp, but something inside him was disconnected. He felt like a gear with a missing tooth, spinning and spinning, but never catching on to anything meaningful. The silence of the workshop wasn't peaceful to him. It was a loud, mocking reminder of his failure. Every morning, Elias would take a set of gears and align them. He followed the books. He measured the springs to the exact millimeter. He did everything right. But by midday, the clock would always shudder and die. He watched the master, an old man named Silas, who seemed to move without effort. Silas could touch a rusted, broken watch, and within minutes, it would begin to hum with life, like a bird waking up in spring. Elias grew bitter. He stayed late into the night, forcing the metal to bend to his will. He grew angry at the brass. He grew angry at the time itself. He felt like a fraud, a man chasing a craft that clearly didn't want him. One Tuesday, the wind howled so loudly it shook the workshop rafters. Elias was working on his finest piece yet, a grand mantel clock made of dark, heavy walnut. He reached for a delicate hairspring, but his fingers, stiff from cold and frustration, snapped the metal. The sound of the snap was small, but in that silent room, it sounded like a thunderclap. Elias dropped his tools. The clatter echoed against the floorboards. He sat in the freezing dark and buried his face in his scarred hands. "I am a shadow," he whispered to the empty room. "I am taking up space in a world of movement while I remain still." He decided right then. When the sun rose, he would pack his bag and leave Oakhaven forever. As he turned to blow out the candle, he felt a warm hand on his shoulder. It was Silas. The old man hadn't been sleeping. He had been watching from the shadows, as he always did. Silas didn't look at the broken spring. He looked at Elias. He picked up a small, unpolished gear from the bench and handed it to the young man. "Elias," Silas said, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "You spend all your energy trying to make the clock tell the world's time. But a clock only works when it finds its own rhythm. You are fighting the metal because you are fighting yourself. Stop trying to be a clockmaker and start being the clock." Elias didn't leave the next morning, but he didn't pick up his tools either. For 3 days, he sat in the workshop and did nothing. He just listened. He listened to the wind in the chimney. He listened to the slow, steady beat of his own heart. He stopped thinking about success. He stopped thinking about failure. He stopped comparing his speed to the old man. He picked up a new piece of brass. He didn't look at the blueprints. He just felt the weight of it in his palm. He realized that for 3 years, he had been trying to force the gears to move. Now, he wanted to understand why they wanted to move. Weeks passed. Elias was no longer the first one to finish, but he was the most focused. He began to work with a quiet grace. He treated each gear as if it had a soul. One afternoon, a soft, tiny sound broke the silence of his corner. Tick. It was faint. It was uneven. But it was there. He didn't cheer. He didn't run to tell Silas. He just closed his eyes and felt the vibration in the wooden table. By the end of the month, 3 clocks were ticking in his corner. They didn't just tell time. They felt alive. One day, a traveler arrived at the shop holding a shattered pocket watch. It had been crushed under a carriage wheel. It was a family heirloom, and 3 other smiths had said it was beyond repair. Elias took the watch. In the past, he would have felt the pressure to prove himself. He would have been anxious and rushed. But now, he simply sat. He looked at the mangled mess of gold and steel. He saw not a broken object, but a rhythm that had lost its way. He worked for 14 hours straight. He didn't eat. He didn't look at the sun. He rebuilt the tiny heart of the watch, piece by microscopic piece. When he finally turned the crown, the watch didn't just start. It sang. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Elias stood at the window, watching the snow begin to melt, signaling the arrival of spring. He realized that his failure in the beginning wasn't because he lacked talent. It was because he was trying to live someone else's life at someone else's pace. He looked back at the 1,000 clocks on the wall. They were all different. Some large, some small, some fast, some slow. But they were all exactly where they were meant to be. Your purpose is not a race to be won. It is a rhythm to be found. Wait for your own heartbeat. The rest of the world will catch up when it's time.